Okay, perfect. So I will share my screen and then make Sarah the host and she can get started. And as we're doing that, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Jessica. I am the AHTA Communications Chair, and we are super excited to have everybody here tonight for this awesome webinar. Sarah did a little talk on equine fitness for us last year, which was super awesome. And that's why we asked her to come back again to do another one for us.
Jessica, it won't let me. It says host disabled attendee screen sharing. Sorry.
Oh, I just tried again. I just clicked it.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. So maybe just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, and then we can get started.
For sure. So thanks for coming and spending your Friday evening with me, everybody. My name is Sarah Pedersen. I originally grew up in Yorkshire in England, grew up in the Pony Club, grew up eventing, and then came over to Canada. I lived in the Middle East for a little while and then came over to Canada. And now I'm a veterinarian in Canada and a very much amateur eventer. So I'm just here to try and help everybody along in their journey. Also, this is my horse Max. Anybody that knows me knows that I'm a little bit obsessed with him. So he's going to help with the presentation tonight as well. Oh, now is it going to let me? Oh, okay. So I should say most of the photographs that everyone sees tonight were actually taken by Jessica. I think most of us know that she's a pretty talented photographer. So if you see any nice pictures, they were probably Jessica's. And if you see any cell phone ones, they were probably mine. Okay, so the first question is, what is fitness? Okay, so there's kind of two ways to think about fitness. One of them is kind of what we traditionally think of as fitness, so cardiovascular fitness, so heart and lungs. The other thing is like a goodness of fitness. And so both of these need to be thought about. So you can kind of define fitness as the condition of being fit and healthy, okay? But also you can talk about the quality of being suitable to fulfill a particular role or task. And so it's really important to think about both of those things. So again, this is Max, and Max does dressage apparently in the style of a rabid giraffe. Oh, can I just remind everybody to turn their sound off? I think there's a couple of kind of microphone breakthroughs here. Can everyone just make sure they're muted? Because I guess it's getting a little muffled. I'll just wait for everyone to do that. Thanks. Okay, so this is Max, like I said, and anybody that has watched Max do dressage, he goes around the arena with the approximation of a rabid giraffe. However, he's very kind to me, and his job is to stand still at my trailer or stand still at my mounting block when I climb on, and he does that very well. Is he ever going to be on the cover of Dressage today? No, but he's fit for the job that I want him to do. Okay, he's also sound, he's also an appropriate weight, and he also has appropriate cardiovascular fitness. So the main focus of this presentation is going to be, like I said, on cardiovascular fitness, but it's just important to think about the horse that you have and whether the horse is actually suitable to do the job that we want him to do. Okay, let's talk a little bit about athletic performance. So some factors that we use with horses to determine athletic performance are biomechanics, so conformation. We're all, we know about good conformation for horses. Something called anaerobic capacity. So that's the ability of the muscles to do work without the presence of oxygen. We'll chat a little bit about that later. Skeletal muscle proportions, heart size, and something called gas exchange, so kind of oxygen, carbon dioxide. Other things that we need to talk about that do determine athletic performance are the horse's willingness to do the job, the horse's trainability, the environment that we have to train the horse in, and the rider and the trainer availability, and then also the tack that we have. I think most of us are pretty comfortable now that we need to have our saddles fitted and those type of things, but those also affect athletic performance. So let's talk a little bit about aerobic and anaerobic exercise. Okay, so this is Max again, and he is not doing any exercise in this picture. He is being a model in this picture, which he's very good at, but that's not taking any anaerobic capacity. He's doing no work. Okay, so when we look at aerobic versus anaerobic exercise, we're talking about with the presence of oxygen or with the absence of oxygen. So when we think about aerobic exercise, most people think about that as the classic cardiovascular conditioning. So walking is aerobic exercise. You can walk and walk and walk, and you can keep walking for long periods of time, and your body is burning oxygen to do the work we're asking it to do. When we talk about anaerobic exercise, that's the exercise that builds strength. And so that's done in the absence of oxygen. And that's classically what we would think of as our muscle training. Okay, so when we think about sprinting, you can't sprint forever. You can sprint for a short period of time, and then you have to quit. It's really important to recognize that we need both types of those aerobic and anaerobic conditioning to make a sound athlete. So when we talk about the benefits of exercise, you read a lot in the news about increasing cardiovascular health and that type of thing. That's typically talking about aerobic exercise. And then anaerobic exercise is classically what we think about athletes doing, so weightlifting. So we want to consider both of these types of exercise to make our horses the best athletes we can have them, okay? So how do we assess fitness? We need to talk, oh, I guess, hang on, technical issues. Okay, let's see. I'm just going to double check. Apparently somebody is in the waiting room and now it won't let me go back. Oh, there we go. Okay, let's see here. Where are we at? How do we assess fitness? Okay, so physiologic. Oh, I guess some people are having trouble, I think, with the muting. I guess the sound coming through again. Can everyone just double check that they're muted? Sorry, guys. It popped up a message for me. Thanks, everyone. So talking about physiologic fitness, that's classically our cardiovascular fitness, so our heart and our lungs. How are our heart and lungs functioning? When we look at equine fitness in a science setting, we also need to look at blood oxygen content. We look at heart rate, resting heart rate, and heart rate at exercise. And we can often do some blood tests in the laboratory as well, looking at respiratory rate and also the rate of recovery. And so I'm hoping that most people are familiar with taking their horse's heart rate. When you test your horse's heart rate, you can determine it just by counting the heartbeats for 30 seconds. And you can either feel the pulse, you can use under their jaw, or you can use a stethoscope. I usually tell people to count the beats for 30 seconds and then double it, because that's easy math and I like easy math. If you're better at math than I am, you can do 15 seconds and times it by 4. But really, to get an accurate heart rate, it should be a minimum of 30 seconds. Most adult horses are right around that 30 beats per minute, approximately, at rest, I should say, at rest. A resting heart rate of 50 beats per minute is problematic. There's probably something going on there. So you can talk to your veterinarian or your healthcare team about that. But we're looking for that resting heart rate right around 30. Some horses will startle when their heart rate is first taken. So say you're listening with a stethoscope and all of a sudden a bird flies across the arena, that heart rate might jump up and then settle down again quite quickly. So that's why it's important to listen for a longer period of time. And it is something that's worth practicing. You also want to practice taking your horse's active heart rate. And so that's the heart rate that your horse has when it's working or immediately thereafter. And we're going to talk a little bit about gadgets later on. You can get heart rate monitors that you can attach to the girth. You can get all kinds of things. But what we're looking for is that heart rate immediately after or during high intensity periods of exercise. And then what we're going to talk about is monitoring how quickly your horse is going to recover. So we're looking for the time taken to go from that exercise high intensity heart rate back down to resting heart rate. We're going to chat a little bit about that later. Respiratory rate is the breathing rate, and we want to be able to take that as well. So some people find it easier to watch their horse's nostrils and time it for 30 seconds. Some people like to watch the horse's side. I don't mind how you do it, but again, it's something that's worth practicing, and we're going to take those rates as well. Anywhere between 8 to 15 at rest is normal for a horse, and anywhere, anywhere going up to kind of 40 when they're exercising, anywhere in there is considered a normal rate for exercise. And basically your horse's heart and lungs work together to deliver oxygen to the muscles, and it's the muscles that give us performance. So we really want to practice taking our horse's vital signs, what we call the vital signs, their heart rate and their respiratory rate. And so this is my current baseline. This is how fit Max and I are right now. We're furry, we're out of shape, we're in our sweatpants, and that's about where we're at. So we're looking at a baseline heart rate, like we said, and we're looking at that recovery rate, and then a baseline respiratory rate and a recovery rate. And then we want to also look at the horse's current exercise program. So I was talking to Jessica before we started here, and what I put together for you guys tonight is an actual fitness assessment chart that you can use. I would recommend weekly for your horses, and we're going to get this PDF out to everybody afterwards. I think Jessica said she can embed it in the link. She's more technologically savvy than I am, but we'll make sure that everybody is able to have a copy of this. And what this is really for is assessing your horse's fitness maybe once a week. That's when we usually say to do it. So I've included temperature on there because it's a good thing to get in the habit of monitoring, especially if you're going to lots of competitions. And then we have the pulse, or the heartbeats, and the respiration. And so you'll see there's a column there for the resting, so you can take it at rest. And then you can take it post-exercise. So what you want to do is you want to take it 10 minutes after exercise. And we're hoping that it's normal at that time. And then you just want to monitor throughout those 10 minutes. So you're going to have your resting, you're going to bring your horse up to exercise, you're going to take those exercise parameters, and then you're going to time how long it takes for them to return to normal. And by 10 minutes, they really should be back to normal. And so we've got some expected heart rates and recovery times listed for you there. Now, maximum heart rate, when we're talking 210 to 260 there, that is for an extremely fit racehorse that is at the peak of its career. So none of us, even our prelim eventers, shouldn't really be up there unless they're doing sprint sets. And then we've got some expected heart rates for you at your expected paces there as well. Okay, so let's have a chat about monitoring equipment. So monitoring equipment is great, and you can spend a lot of money getting some equipment for your horse, and that's fantastic. I have no problem with that, but what I need people to know is why and how they're using it. So you can get GPS tracking on these, you can get heart rate monitor, you can get stride analysis. There's all kinds of things that these monitors will do. And I have no problem with any of them. I think they're great tools, but recognize that they are tools. They're not going to replace anything. So if you and your trainer come up together with a fitness program and you want to use this tool to help your fitness program and log your rides and log your fitness and track it, that's great. But understand why you're doing it. So understand that you're tracking your horse's resting heart rate and the horse's heart rate at exercise. And yes, you might be doing that with a monitor, but you can do that quite simply, like I say, with a stethoscope or just your hands and a pocket watch. The stride analysis is really nice to have. The GPS is really nice to have if you are learning your different speeds for your cross country and your show jumping and your meters per minute. That can be really helpful with the GPS tracking. But I think it's quite easy to get very confused and very overwhelmed with a lot of the gadgets out there. And so my recommendation, especially if you're just starting out, is try not to go crazy with the technology, but learn how to fit in your horse first, and then look for one if you're interested in a gadget that's going to give you maybe your resting heart rate, your exercise heart rate. If you want to look at stride patterning, some people are using them now to look at stride patterning, and maybe it can flag you to a lameness issue that your horse might need to see a veterinarian for. All great tools, but again, we need to understand the why before we jump into using them. I want to talk a little bit about the importance of fitness for injury prevention. So this is me hosing Max's leg at 10:15 at night, like many of us have done, because his leg got a bit warm and he had a little bit of a strain. And so, okay. All right, are we back in business?
We look good. Thank you.
Okay, no problem.
Being patient.
So, the importance of fitness in injury prevention. So I think I can speak for everybody here when I say the goal is to keep our horses injury free. That allows us to enjoy our season, and it allows us to enjoy our horses for longer. So like I say, this is me, the same as all of you have probably done at 10:30 at night, cold hosing my horse's legs because he had a little bit of a warm leg after a schooling time one day. The major problem in training horses for athletic activities is keeping them injury free. Most of us know this, unfortunately, through experience. And by far, the most common reason for a horse to retire is musculoskeletal injury. There's many factors that contribute to that. Conformation, the schedule, the training surface, the age and stage of the horse, there's all kinds of things. For those, really what it comes down to is for those that are more fit, they perform their activity at a lower percentage of the maximal capability. And so they can perform the task more easily at a longer period of time, they fatigue less rapidly, they recover faster, and they have a greater reserve. And so really the whole point of getting our horses fit is so that they can do the job more easily and stay fit and stay healthy and stay sound for us, so we can continue to enjoy them. Fatigue alters movement patterns, and it puts strain on parts of the body that aren't used to it. And that increases the likelihood of injury. So really the reason that we get our horses fit is so that they're able to do the job and to decrease the likelihood of injury. So this is me whispering in Max's ear that things are about to get real quick, because we've got to get going here for this season. But the point that we want to make is when we're improving fitness, it needs to be a gradual increase in workload. So we want to challenge the body, but we don't want to overstress it. So generally speaking, it's an 8-week process, and you can break it down into kind of 3 stages. You want to do stage 1, which is your slow work to prepare the body's muscles, tendons, and ligaments. You can do, and then stage 2 is work to improve strength. So stage 1 is really aerobic fitness, like we talked about earlier. Stage 2 is our strength training, strength and stamina training. So we're beginning to come into some of that anaerobic fitness. And then stage 3 is our faster work to prepare the horses for cross-country type events. And so, you know, I kind of just verbally, and this is really difficult because everybody's horse is different, but just kind of an average fit horse that is coming into an 8-week program, you know, this is a horse like Max that's been out in the field all winter, he's done nothing. So week 1, he's going to do 5 days of 20 minutes of walking down the road. That's what he's going to do. Week 2, he's going to do 30 to 40 minutes of walking down the road 5 to 6 days. Week 3, he's going to do an hour, including some hills, up and down the road, probably 5 to 6 days. Week 4, we're going to get a little bit, we're going to introduce some fitness, some trot, some dressage training. Week 5, we're going to do 20 to 30 minutes in dressage, introducing our trot work, a little bit of canter. And then week 6, we're going to increase the time schooling and decrease the time on the road. And week 7, we're going to canter up some hills and we're going to introduce a little bit of jumping. And week 8 to week 9, we're going to increase our fast work and our jumping. That's like a super rough, super basic idea. And obviously everybody's going to work with their coaches and figure out where their horse is currently at. With especially the last year, some horses are in the peak fitness because a lot of people couldn't get to the barns and the trainers have been training the horses. They're doing great. Other people haven't, have just put the horse in the field and they're starting right from scratch. So it's just really important to figure out where you're at and figure out how you want to get there, and make sure that whatever you do is done gradually, and we're monitoring those vital signs. We're monitoring that heart rate, we're monitoring that respiratory rate, and we're monitoring our time for recovery. So I kind of have to talk about this. So what is the goal? Okay, and this is probably the most important question to answer. Talk to your trainer about your goals, have a chat with your vet, make sure that you've got your appropriate care done, your Coggins, your vaccines if you need them, talk to your equine wellness team, think about some nutritional requirements, but what's the goal? So like I mentioned earlier, Max goes around dressage like a rabid giraffe, but my goal is just to be there and enjoy the event. Okay, I'm not out there to be competitive. I'm not out there to win. I'm out there to have fun and get around safely. That's a very, very different goal than somebody who's looking at upgrading to prelim this year, or somebody that's running their first training run, whatever it happens to be. I think first of all, it's really important to define your goal, because that kind of leads where you're going to go. So my fitness program for Max is going to look super different. We're probably going to truck around an entry level, right? Nothing too big for us. That's going to look very different for somebody that's looking, maybe prelim, maybe looking to head into an intermediate event down in the States, or whatever that happens to be. So you need to know what the end goal is before you can make the route to get there. So just like if you're driving somewhere, you want to put it in your Google Maps, you put in where you're going first, and then Google Maps figures out how to get you there. That's exactly how I want you to build your training program. What does my end goal look like? And then break it down to how to get there. So we need to talk about overconditioning or fatigue. So this is Max having a snooze after he's done his event. This is a super, super complex subject. So overconditioning is talked about a lot, or overtraining. So fatigue is a physiologic response to exercise. We do need a little bit of fatigue, but it's also an inability to sustain further activity at the current intensity. And there's a few types of fatigue that can happen. So structural fatigue, so tendons, ligaments, bones. We've all seen horrific, clips of racehorses that break their legs mid-race. That's a structural bone failure. Nobody wants that. Chronic fatigue, so something like a chronic anemia or a chronic, it creeps up on you slowly. You're just not able to maintain that level, that workload that you were previously. And then acute fatigue is a little bit like when we talked about we were training and maybe you sprint down the driveway and then you're out of breath. So that's an acute fatigue, and your muscles just simply can't produce any more energy at that moment in time, but you may recover quickly from acute fatigue. So when we talk about overconditioning, we need to really think about that, because yes, we want our horses fit, of course we do, but we don't want to overcondition them and get into something called overtraining syndrome. So overtraining syndrome is, like I said, it's a very complex condition and it's not well understood in the literature, but we do know that it usually involves a vague loss of performance of the horse without an obvious clinical reason. And they generally recover with 1 or 2 weeks of rest. We know that it involves the nervous system, so the brain, the nervous tissue gets involved. And it's quite hard to define. The nervous tissue gets involved, the muscle tissue gets involved. The muscle tissue has been researched a little bit more in terms of a chronic fatigue and overtraining syndrome. And some studies have shown essentially that with overtraining and overfatigue, the hormonal balances in the muscle get out of whack, and the horse just simply cannot be in a state of health at that time. And as we also know as well, anybody that's kind of gone back to the gym, you yourself have probably had that buildup of lactic acid. You get stiff, you get sore. That can be as a result of overconditioning or overtraining and fatigue as well. And so like anything, it's a balance. Of course, we want our horses fit. We want them to be well. We don't want them to injure themselves, but we don't want to overdo it. Peak and taper. That's a fun topic. That's always a controversial one. So I don't want to be doing gallop sets all the way through the year to get my horse ready for a competition in June. Like we chatted about with that overtraining syndrome, we need to give the body time to rest and recover. So we talk about peak and taper. We want them to peak for their events. Obviously, everybody wants to be at their best for their events or the competition season as a whole. And we want to taper that off. And so really we do this to increase the longevity and the health and the wellness of your horse. If you never get a rest, it's actually not great. When you look at Olympic athletes, they train specifically for the Olympics and then they train down from it. They're not at that peak performance 100% of the time. And the reason that they're not is because it's just not sustainable. And so what we want to do is the goal is to transition smoothly from the off season to our competition season and then back to our off season again. So when we talk about the peak and taper, it's training for that one specific event or that one specific season, but then also coming down and allowing the horse to go back into a state of rest. So really, it's a little bit like a longer term version of warm up and cool down. And the reason we do that again is to prevent injury and keep longevity. So you don't, like I say, you don't want to be doing gallop sets in January if your event is in June, because your horse is you've way overcooked it and you're going to seriously increase the risk for injury. Okay, cool down. Why do we care? Cool down has lots and lots and lots of functions. When people have probably read online and there's lots of discussion and lots of controversy around this topic, but you know, muscle temperature and tendon temperature heats up to around 43 degrees at exercise. And so when we warm up, we want to give the body a chance to warm up. But when we cool down, we want to circulate oxygen. We want to disperse that lactic acid. We want to physically cool our tendons. So there's a lot of research around this right now. Tendons that are heated up, they regularly heat up to around 45 degrees with exercise. When we have boots on our horses, that doesn't allow that heat to disperse. And so what we want to do when we're looking at that is we want to run our horse cross country, that the tendon is heated up, but as soon as possible, you want those boots off and you want those legs cooled down. Because what the research tells us is if we leave those tendon cells, the cells that are in the tendon heated up at 48 degrees for 10 minutes, 22% of those cells survive, which means we lose about 80% of those cells if we're at 48 degrees for 10 minutes. That's 3 degrees more than the 45 degrees, which is normal for exercise. So the point of all of those numbers and all of that science is to tell you that cool down is as important, if not almost more important than the warm up. And again, the goal is to transition the body from a state of exercise to a state of rest safely. So everything we want to do is we don't want to shock the body, whether that's the long-term peak and taper or the short-term warm up and cool down. And so, like I say, it's normal for the body to heat up to that 43 degrees for muscles and tendons to go through their full range of motion, reach their peak elasticity. But we also want to allow that to cool down as quickly as we can so that we don't cause damage. Same with stretching. What's the purpose of stretching after we've exercised? So this is Max doing his very best lumbar back stretch in a very odd ditch by my house with me sliding off the back of the saddle, which was fairly entertaining for all involved. Stretching maintains the range of motion. Over time, if we don't stretch, muscles can shorten. If we stretch, it reduces our chance of injury. It reduces pain. Muscles that can't expand to their full extent are at risk of injury. So we want to keep that range of motion as much as possible to, again, prevent injury and allow our horses to be at peak training. And then the other quick thing that I wanted to chat about, and forgive me if everybody knows, but I wanted to let you know what the vet is doing at the finish line. So why are they there? They're not there to irritate you. I know sometimes if you've had a really bad run, you just want to get off the course and you want to go talk to your trainer or whoever. And if you've had a really great run, maybe you're excited and you want to go celebrate, but they're there for your welfare and safety of your horse. And so they're looking at exactly what we've been talking about tonight. They're looking at your heart rate, your respiratory rate, and the rate of recovery. And they're essentially making sure your horse is not at immediate risk for acute fatigue, like we've talked about. And remember, and this is possibly my favorite picture that Jessica has ever taken in the world, remember, we do this for fun, guys. And so if it's not fun, we shouldn't be doing it. And if we can keep ourselves and our horses safer, then it's going to be more fun. And what I will do now is I will hand you back to Jessica. Maybe. Okay, you should be the host, Jessica, in theory.
Oh dear, good times. Thank you everybody for being patient. Oh, that was a fun time. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. That was awesome. So we'll just sort of open it up to anybody who has any questions or anything you want to ask Sarah on equine fitness level, eventing, jumping, dressage, anything like that, or anything that she's talked about so far, or anything that you have a question about that maybe she hasn't talked about.
Crickets.
Yeah, I've got one for you.
Okay, somebody better say who's talking, because
it's Natalie.
Hello, Natalie. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thanks. What's up?
So, as you know, Elsie's been not doing much lately.
Right.
And she's feeling pretty good lately, which is awesome. And I've been bringing her back into a little more, we're doing a lot of trail rides. We're starting to do some arena work again. And she's lost, all muscle tone, all fitness. Yep. And so how do I know what kind of fitness level and muscle tone I want for the casual work we're doing now? Because it's a whole new world for us.
Okay, so again, you're going to go right back to basics with assessing the cardiovascular fitness first. And so you can watch your respiratory rate and your heart rate. And if she's cardiovascularly fit and appropriate for the work that you're doing, what you'll notice is if she's not building enough muscle and she doesn't have enough muscle tone to do the work that you're asking her to do, she's going to fatigue quicker. And you'll see that fatigue in the heart rate and the respiratory rate. So if she's simply not strong enough to carry out the work that you're asking her to do, that's going to be reflected probably more in your recovery time rather than your kind of strict heart rate, respiratory rate. But what you might see is if she's not strong enough to keep up with the current workload, she might come out a little bit stiff one day. You might start to see signs of a little bit of fatigue creeping in. And if that's the case, you're going to back off the workload, but increase the strength training. So that's when you can use things like raised poles, raised cavalettes at a walk to build up some of those core tissues, those core muscles, and the back strength. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much.
No problem.
Sarah, we have a question from Emerson, and they've asked, does anything change as far as fitness goes for miniature horses?
So the big change for miniature horses, the cardiovascular fitness is going to be very, very similar. What we have to watch in our miniature horses is a little bit more, because their legs are a slightly different proportion than our regular horses. Often they have slightly shorter legs in proportion to their body. And so we actually have to watch for tendon and muscle fatigue a little bit quicker in those guys than we would in like our big race horses or something. But the rules basically are the same. The heart and lungs, we're going to watch the heart and lungs. The parameters are going to be different though, and I'm sure that there's lots of resources, but the normals for a miniature are going to be vastly different than the normals for an adult 1,200-pound horse. So I would just suggest that you speak with your veterinarian to find out what normal parameters you should be looking for, and then kind of what recovery parameters you should be looking for, if that makes sense.
Sarah, would a smaller horse generally have higher like heart rate and respiratory rate, sort of like smaller animals do? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we look at foals, we're up around, foals, heart rate of 80 can be considered quite normal in a foal, whereas in a horse that would be really concerning if it was at rest. And so there are lots of different normal parameters, and that's why it's so difficult to give people broad guidelines, because a smaller horse that's maybe 15 hands, that horse might be 40 beats per minute at rest, whereas a big horse like mine, he might be right down at 28 or 30. And that's normal for those animals. And so I think that's really important. And maybe I didn't sort of make that point strongly enough, that it's so important to practice and get used to doing this while you're in the off season and the training season. And what's normal for your horse. So especially, like I say, I put the temperature monitoring in there. And some horses just run a little bit hotter. So if your horse's normal temperature is 38.3, and that's normal, for my horse, he runs at 37, 37.6 is pretty normal for him. He runs pretty cool. And so if he's temping 38.3, there's something going on with him, whereas that might be very normal for your horse. So getting that baseline and taking it consistently is really important for getting to know your individual animal.
Perfect. That makes perfect sense. I know I have a thoroughbred and she tends to run really hot. And then I always have to tell people at the end, I'm like, no, that's normal. Give her like 15 minutes, she'll be back down. So yeah, it's definitely a very individual thing for sure. And it's up to us to like find out what those individual thing, like what their individual normal is.
Right. And the only way you're going to know that is to consistently check your baseline over time, right?
Absolutely. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you for that. Tabitha's asked, alternative for hill work. We have no hills here. So is there something you would recommend for people that
Cavaliers and trot poles, everybody's favorite, because what we're looking for in the hill work is that push and that flexion through the stifle and the lumbosacral flexion through the back. So you can achieve the core engagement and the push that we need with Cavaliers.
Awesome.
So yes, Cavaliers are a great option.
Perfect. Sherry asks, do you support generally the use of the ice boots and cooling sleeves that are readily available?
So I think, again, like I was mentioning with the monitors, there's a whole lot of gadgets out there. And some of them are good and some of them are not so good. When we're icing legs, the best way to ice legs by far, period, the end, is in a slurry, an ice slurry. So a bucket of water with a bag of ice dumped in. And yes, you can get a lot of these circulating gadgets, but for me, the old school is still the best, because what happens is if you have a hot tendon and you just pack it around with ice, or you pack an ice boot on, the air acts as insulation, okay? And so the reason that we use the water slurry is to get the cool water and the ice water close in contact with that skin. A lot of the ice boots that wrap around, yeah, they're great. You can Velcro them on really quick, but they actually don't, they only touch the skin in certain places. And you can end up with like ice scalds in certain places and air pockets in another, so they don't cool the limb evenly. Now, you can get into the circulatory systems that have like the motors or the running where you're circulating like an ice slurry through. I think Game Ready was the big one for a long time. Those are a little bit different because you're circulating that air, but the point is that you want to make sure that you don't have air pockets. So whatever you're using, for me, standing them in that rubber tub or garbage tub of water, or if you happen to be at Alhambra, standing them in the Red Deer River is great because you've got that cool water in contact with the skin.
Perfect. I think
that makes sense. And it's a little bit like everything else. If it works for you and you're happy, that's great. But why are you using it? And often we need to cool the circulation in contact with the skin. So if you've got an ice boot that you're just Velcroing on and it's touching your horse in like 3 places around the leg and everything else is in the air, it's not doing its job for you.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah, it's more like, I know lots of people use things for convenience, but not so much, they don't focus on the effectiveness. So that's a really good point about those type of boots only being able to not touch all of the skin, even though they are way more convenient than other things we could do.
The other thing that I should touch on, sorry, I know there's more questions, but the other thing to be really careful about is you can cause injuries with those ice boots. If the horse's legs are wet, if you hose them down and then you put those ice boots on and leave them, it can, we've all, as kids, we've all, licked the frozen pole and stuck our tongue to the pole. It can do the same thing on the horse's leg. So you have to be really careful and make sure that you're not causing a cryo injury as well. So I'm still back to ice and water.
Perfect. All right, we'll go on to the next question. As far as the end, like the vet at the end of cross country, Joan has asked, can you tell us a little bit more about how the vet determines when to allow the horse to leave? What pulse and respiration is necessary? And how long do you think they need to hold the horse?
So again, super individual, but what they're looking for is that heart rate and that respiratory rate to come into that semblance of normal. And so if the horse has an abdominal effort, if the horse has an extremely high heart rate that we feel is a danger, we'll watch those horses a little bit longer. It also depends on the level. So again, coming back to, Max is going to come off, puffing a little bit, but he's not going to be the same intensity as a horse that's just come off running a prelim, right? It's just not the same physical exertion. So it depends on how long, how long the course has been run, at what pace the course has been run. The rule of thumb is we'll take the heart rate, the resp rate, and then you're on the clock for usually 10 minutes. That's kind of the industry standard, is you get your 10 minutes. And if your heart rate and resp rate has come somewhere close to normal and the horse looks like it's recovering appropriately, you're good to go. If your horse is kind of borderline, they might hold it for an extra 5 minutes. So it's really difficult when you say how long do they need to hold the horse for? Usually 10 minutes. Now, if your horse is super fit and the vet checks after 5 and everything's back down to normal already, you're good to go. Right? But what they're looking for is those recovery times to be within that 10-minute period, because that's generally kind of the industry accepted that your horse was fit enough to do the event. If 20 minutes later your horse still has an increased heart rate and an increased respiratory rate, that horse is in danger and it needs medical attention. Perfect.
That makes total sense. Peggy asks for the next question, what type of fitness program would you recommend for bringing a dressage horse back into work? And what would you change for a dressage versus a cross-country horse?
Right. So again, that goes back to what's the end goal. So our cross-country horse has to be able to run, 4 kilometers at however many meters a minute, whatever you're trying to do, right? Versus a dressage horse has to be able to compete with much more strength. And so it's not a very long period of time, but they have to be maybe a little bit stronger, or they have to have different strength and different core strength. And so a fitness program for a dressage horse is going to look a lot more into repetitive motions, a lot of pull work, a lot of strengthening, a lot of those types of things. A lot of people like the resistance band training that we can do. That type of stuff is really great for that strength training. Horses we're going to do that are going cross country, we're going to look more at the cardiovascular fitness, the classic, canter sets, hill work, that type of thing. So again, it comes back to what's the end goal. Our dressage horses, if they're purely dressage, it's a lot more kind of strength training and less cardiovascular. Our cross country horses, we want them to be cardiovascularly a little bit more leaner and a little bit fitter in terms of the maximum heart rate that they're able to sustain, the period of time that they're able to sustain that heart rate, and then we're looking for it to come down more quickly.
Perfect. All right, so next question from Claire. Is there a difference in the efficiency of using poles and cavaliers at the walk or versus the trot? Does one build strength or fitness better than the other?
So yes, it does. So a lot of the times the horses can cheat in trot because they can use that spring and kind of spring over it. And I should preface this with, I'm not a trainer, so please always check with your trainer, because there may be some other reason that you may do or not do specific exercises from either a behavioral standpoint or from a training standpoint. For me, the horses can cheat less at walk because they're not using that speed as a help to get them over. In terms of efficiency, again, it depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to build that core strength, I actually really like doing longer stretches of cavaletti at a walk, because it keeps that core engaged and helps the stifle flex, and it lifts them through the back for longer periods of time. Whereas, like I say, for me, trotting over the cavalettis, they can cheat a little bit because they've got that forward momentum and that spring. So it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. For range of motion and flexibility, and really sustained core strength, I like walk. If you're going for maybe training a better bascule in your jump, you might choose to do that with a trot.
So would that be the same, like a canter, like a slower canter would be more effective in like strength building than a faster canter over poles?
Right. Right, because a faster canter, they can use the speed to just lever and flatten out, whereas a slower collected canter is harder. And if you think about our dressage movements, that makes sense. Our piaffe and our our canter pirouettes are much more advanced movement than a turn on the forehand, right?
No, that makes absolute sense. Yeah, definitely more like the thoroughbred or like the get it over quicker part. And then other horses have the more like the tendency to slow down and really like sit and push. So it's, I guess, finding the happy medium to like help out both types. So they
exactly
can, benefit themselves and get stronger and do both.
Yeah.
All right. Another question from Brittany. She's like, so sorry if this was discussed at the start. Aerobic versus anaerobic fitness examples for horses. And she says example dressage for a dressage lesson.
Okay, so we chatted a little bit about that. So I think it's going to be recorded so you can pop back and talk about it. But the easiest analogy is aerobic fitness is your walking. It's the one you can sustain for long periods of time. Anaerobic fitness is your sprinting, that it's high intensity for a short period of time. And so for a dressage horse, our aerobic might be walking, and our anaerobic might be tempi changes, right? The horse has to put a lot of effort in to do his tempi changes. And so that would be an example for that. Whereas our our jumping horses, our aerobic might be, our dressage, our really fit prelim horses might, they might not even go into anaerobic exercise in a dressage test, although if there's a lot of canter, they may. Whereas cross country, for sure, they're going to get into that aerobic state. Oh, did we here? Let's see. I'm just looking at the chat here.
Okay, you can hear me now. Sorry.
Yes, I can. That's okay.
How many times a week would you jump for a young horse that's just starting to jump? And maybe a little comment on like how often and the duration.
Okay, so again, that's a really loaded question, and it's individual. And so a lot of the jumping work refers back to growth plate closures and cartilage development. And so our thoroughbreds have been bred over time to be mature at fairly young ages. So that's why, like, we'll see 2-year-old race horses. You don't see a 2-year-old warm blood doing work. So the warm bloods, the growth plates, some of the growth plates in the cervical spine don't actually close until 7 years old for the warm bloods, whereas the thoroughbreds are going to mature much more quickly. So again, it's an individual horse question. So, are you saying a young horse that is, a 4-year-old thoroughbred or a 4-year-old warm blood? In terms of intensity and times a week, the young horses, for me, they don't need to be jumping more than once or twice a week. I think any more than that, again, I'm not a trainer, but they can get sour. We can get into that over conditioning, into that over fatigue. And we don't want to be hammering on those young joints, because we want this horse to have a 15, 20-year career, hopefully, right? And so for me, there's no rush. Everybody's timeline is different, but I think it's just really important to look at the breed of your horse. And again, look at the end goal. If your end goal is that your horse is going to jump a meter for the rest of his life, well, there's no rush to get there, right? Take an extra year, take the confidence building, and, consider your horse's joints. Whereas maybe this is your Olympic prospect and you've got a timeline to make an Olympic event. Okay, well, maybe you need to rush a little bit. But for me, it's a lot about just the general horse's maturity and looking at your individual horse. And just like us, horses hit puberty at different rates, just like people. If you've ever seen, I don't know how many are parents on here, but if you've ever seen a grade 8 class, there's some that still look like babies, and there'll be some 6 foot tall, young men with facial hair. And so puberty happens at different rates for everybody. So it's just really important to look at your individual horse and where it is on the spectrum, and then make a decision with your trainer from there.
Perfect. I totally agree with that. Yeah, I find like training young horses, it's such an individual thing. And I find like sort of less is more. I'd rather pop them over 3 tiny little cross trails, give them a pat, and then call it a day, versus like drilling, especially when they're still like figuring it out. And you want to keep it like simple and fun for them too, which I think is super important. Erin asks, after cross country, how long do you recommend using ice boots or cold hosing?
So minimum 15 minutes is kind of the industry standard. So if they're standing in an ice slurry, minimum of 15 minutes. For me, I usually do 20 to 30 minutes. Again, depending on the intensity of the exercise. If I've been cross-country schooling and the horse hasn't really super exerted himself, I might be more 15 minutes. If he just ran a prelim or an intermediate, I'm going to be 30 minutes, and I want that tendon cold because of how we discussed the dangers of having that high temperature in the leg. And the other point, everyone kind of seems to be on the cool the legs team, which is great, but I want to really encourage people, as soon as you are across the finish line and you are off your horse, to let them start that recovery, rip the boots off. Because the longer the boots have done their job, take them off, because the longer that you don't allow the air to disperse around that tendon, the longer you're risking that tendon. And so the best thing you can do for your horse, you know, we can debate 15 versus 20 minutes of icing, but actually the best thing you can do is rip those boots off once they've done their job. And that allows the cool air to start cooling them. So the research shows us that there's very, very little increase in the heat of a tendon if you work your horse bare-legged. And so, no, I'm not suggesting that anybody goes cross-country with no boots on. Of course, we know boots have a purpose and they're there for a reason and they're there for protection. But once they've done their job, rip them off.
All right, so we have another question, and we sort of touched on this earlier, so it's up to you if you want to just like quickly reiterate it again, or if you want to direct people back to earlier in the video when we repost it on our YouTube channel. So thank you for letting me join. I'm a distance endurance rider and do competitive trail. What's the best way to cool tendons? Typically have access to sponging, cool cold water, and cooling ice wraps. Is there a rule of thumb for how long cooling takes? So it's up to you if you want to do this again, or if you want to direct them again.
It's kind of the same thing, right? And so I like a water ice slurry. And you know, if sponging and ice wraps, that's great. If you're going to do ice wraps, wet the legs down, but make sure you're not going to get the tongue on the metal cold, freezing and sticking. 15 minutes minimum. And, you know, I like water and ice mixed. I like the slurry, you know, but cold sponging, cold water is fine. And again, you know, rule of thumb, 15 minutes minimum. And then I found the chat so I can read my questions now. Natalie says, how does walking through snow compare to hills and Cavaliers? Is deep snow and hills too much? So that really depends on the consistency of the snow. So the beautiful fluffy powder that we get, you know, the champagne powder that we get in the Rockies, that's, you know, not super hard to walk through. If it's the really wet, thick and heavy snow, you know, that might not be great. And, you know, is deep snow and hills too much? Again, depends on your horse, depends on your fitness level. I'm a very amateur hiker, and I don't like walking on trails that aren't packed down. Some people, it doesn't bother them, and that's the whole point of snowshoes, right? Is we don't want to walk through the snow, it's hard. And so it can be a really good conditioning tool, but again, you don't want to overstress those muscles. And it depends on how long you're going, how deep the snow is, what's the weight of the snow, what's the incline of the hill. It's super individual. So then you have to go back to asking your questions, monitor your horse's heart rate, monitor your horse's respiratory rate. If your horse is huffing and puffing, trying to get up the hill in the snow, probably too much. Let's see. Annette didn't have pen and paper to get down the stages of fitness. Oh, okay. If you go back and watch the video, it should be on the slide there. But really, let me just flip to my little thing here and we can review it super quick.
And we'll be reposting this on our YouTube channel, the AHTA YouTube channel, for anybody who wants to watch it again. And Sarah has a great PDF she's going to include that we'll link to as well, in case you missed anything. So go ahead, Sarah.
So stage one is our slow work to prepare muscles and tendons and ligaments, and that's typically our aerobic walking work. Usually 4 weeks, if we're bringing a horse back, is the minimum of walking for that. Stage two is our strength and stamina. So we'll start to add in a little trot and canter work for stamina and a little maybe pole work or hill work for strength. And then stage three is our fast work to really get our heart rate and our recovery and our cardiovascular fitness up to speed. How long for walk for first week and so on? Would it be possible to get a copy of that? Yeah, just watch the YouTube video. So it's really individual in terms of this, and this is the problem. Everybody kind of wants a cookie cutter, this is how you get a horse fit. And unfortunately, that just does not exist. It's all guidelines, and you just have to go based off of the guidelines. Uh-oh, did I lose everybody? Let's see. After hearing your comment about the leg tendons being so warm and breaking down the cells makes me wonder, what is a recommended boot for cross country? Is wool still the best boot? So again, super individual on your horse. There's tons of really great cross country boots. You just need to be aware that any boot is going to slow down the dispersal of the heat from that tendon. And so my horse just runs in a lightweight boot with a little bit of protection in. That's all he needs, like the front and back protection. But the really important thing is, I don't really care what boot you use. I just want you to jump off at the finish line. The vet will listen to your heart rate of the horse, and while your vet's listening, rip the boots off. Because it's really like, everybody talks about, you know, oh, this boot's vented, or this boot's this, or this boot's that. I don't really care. They're all going to heat the tendons up. Let the boots do the job and then take them off. Wendy, I know nothing about bedding a horse in and out for eventing. Is the baseline pulse and respiration taken for a vet in? So generally in Canada, no, there's just a vet at the end of the cost when you run cross country. The Ridgeway Cardiac Recovery Index, so it can be used. It depends on the individual vet, but really what we're looking for is just that recovery within that 10-minute period. FEI is a whole different ballgame, and there's a whole set of rules that are very well published about what's acceptable for FEI. So it's a little bit different. And then Natalie says, her horse never seems to get huffing and puffing tired. Well, that's good, because we don't want that. And she never gets sweaty. I'm worried her lack of muscle is a problem, but would she be showing some TPR signs if her muscle was too low? Yes. So she might not get huffy and puffy, but what you're going to notice is her coming out slowly. And she might be stiff if there's some muscle fatigue. You have to pay attention. And this is a super great trick, actually, that everybody can use. So something I like to do is look at stride length of horses. And you don't have to be fancy. You can just walk them through a puddle and then watch the hoof prints afterwards. Or if you're in an arena, just rake a little bit of the arena flat and then walk them through the newly raked arena and look at the stride length. And what you'll watch, and this is a really neat trick for people to use, is as the horse is fatigued, their stride length decreases. So if you're worried, just check in, you know, ride through the newly raked patch once at the beginning of the ride, and then 10-15 minutes in at the same pace. You have to go either at walk or at trot. I like trot because it's symmetrical. Trot them through that same piece of raked ground and have a look. Is the stride length changing? Is your horse getting fatigued that way? So you can watch lots of other things other than the TPR. Are they holding their back differently? Are they holding their neck set differently? And so if you're worried that they don't have the strength to carry out the job you're asking, watch the stride length. The stride length will change.
I have a question sort of on that note, actually. Horses I've worked with, they have like worked great for like 20-30 minutes, and all of a sudden they're like really short stepping quite significantly on one leg, just sort of all of a sudden, usually after a canter. At what point would you feel that's abnormal, and at what point would you think that's just sort of like normal muscle fatigue, when the horse has like no other signs of anything wrong?
So I think a couple of things can happen. If it's after cantering, probably a good idea, usually it's a hind leg, right? Is that what you're feeling? Yeah. So usually that's an issue that the horse has overworked its lumbar back or its SI region, and it's quote unquote tweaked its SI. So maybe you're cantering, and then, the horse just kind of, maybe it lost its balance for a moment, especially if it's a younger horse. Maybe they're losing the balance. Maybe it's really overworking that lumbar because it doesn't quite have the core strength to hold it. And maybe there's a little bit of a lumbar spasm. So I think if it's something that happens consistently with one horse after, a certain amount of time, have your wellness team check the horse's SI for sure. I think that can be another one. And on that vein, talking about fatigue, the brain goes first. right? We all know when we're riding cross country and we're holding our breath, right? The first thing that goes is your brain, okay? And so the brain goes before the body. And so when you're working with a young horse, the first sign of fatigue with that young horse might be the concentration goes. Pay attention to that. The brain goes before the body. So if you're riding a young horse and all of a sudden they're quote unquote, they just start getting stupid, pay attention to that. That's the brain running out of glucose. The horse is tired, the horse is fatigued, quit. Oh, somebody, I think I missed a question at 7:51, a sweaty horse. Maybe I missed that one. I think maybe that was when I opened the chat. Do you want to go back to that?
Can I just ask one more question about mine? Because mine's
Yeah.
been like more strictly on the lunge, noticing the weakness in the hind.
Okay.
Like
So,
not under saddle.
yeah, after a canter.
Yeah.
I'm still on Team SI for that.
Yeah. That's good to know. Perfect. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I have a very fit thoroughbred who has worked 3 to 4 times a week. Yet even when we do low intensity rides, she seems to sweat a lot. What might that be a reflection of in terms of, if the horse is quite relaxed, that's probably, it's so just like some people, let me back up. So for me, I go red super easily. So I like walk 5 strides and I'm like, my face is bright red, no matter how fit I am. And so thoroughbreds are typically what we call thin skinned. What that means is their skin isn't actually any thinner, but they're built to run really fast in a straight line, and their vessels, their cardiovascular system is built for high capacity aerobics. And so their vessels are close to the surface, and which is why we call them like thin skinned, which is why the thoroughbreds tend to get really, really veiny. And so it can just be because they're a thoroughbred and because the vessels are very, very close to the skin, and sweating is how we cool down. So if they sweat immediately, their vessels are really there. Sometimes it can just be a genetic thing. Having said that, if your horse is really, really stressed and it's more of an anxiety response, then that might be worth looking into. I don't really want to take the lid off the can of worms, but if they're super stressed and maybe they're a little bit ulcery or something, and I'm not suggesting that's the case, I haven't seen your horse, but if they're anxious and stressed about exercise, or maybe their saddle isn't fitting and they're anticipating that it's going to be pinching, that could be a reason as well. So I think it really depends on kind of, again, the individual horse and why that's happening. It can be genetic. It can just be a thing. They might just be really well perfused, or there might be a medical reason for that or a behavioral reason for that you need to look into. It just really depends. Sorry, that's not very helpful, but that's the answer. And then I also have a Pasifino that no matter our fitness, he breathes like a freight train. Is that a fitness training gap on my part? So if his heart rate is appropriate and his respiratory rate isn't, sometimes horses can get a little bit of what we call a diaphragmatic flutter. And we think it's something to do with the sensation of the girth being around the belly, and they don't breathe as deeply as they should. And so I think, again, you have to look at the whole picture. If he's breathing like a freight train, but everything else appears normal and that respiratory rate comes down appropriately, probably not a concern. If that's happening consistently, yeah, definitely rule out any respiratory issues, heaves, that type of thing is going to be important to look into. So again, it's a whole picture question. For horses being trailered on long trips, can standing wraps heat the tendons enough to cause damage, or is there a better alternative? So no, those tendons heat up during exercise. And so the evidence has shown us with the polo wraps and the horse just standing, that it doesn't heat up enough to cause damage. And so I think it's no problem to have polos or shipping boots on a horse in the trailer, because even though they're holding their balance, again, it's not a super intense workout or exercise for them. So no. my chat just jumped up. Hold on, I want to make sure I don't miss somebody again. I'm just wondering what exercise I can use, ride, not in the lesson. What exercise would I suggest to her? She's jumping work all winter. And so exercises for what? Are we, I think Micah, is that, you can put your mic on if you want, but it depends on what your goal is. So we're back to what's the goal. Are you trying to improve core strength? Are you trying to improve your bascule, your flexion, extension in the jump? Are you trying to improve cardiovascular fitness? What's the goal? Because that will determine what's the exercise.
Okay, so she's 5, and our goal is to be at 2.9 by the end, 2.9, 2.6 in there. By the end of the summer, and we're just kind of working on our relationship right now. I'm just wondering what exercises would be good to improve her strength.
I'm back on team Cavaliers. Cavaliers are my favorite. So walk Cavaliers, actually, I would specifically say, because what we're looking for is for the horse to look down, okay, but pick up its limb. And if you kind of do it on yourself, if you're looking down but you curl your knee up to your chest, it automatically engages your core and you're increasing range of motion. And so absolutely, that would be great. On the young horses, I really like ridden Serpentines as well. So asking them to change their direction of balance. 5-loop Serpentines are hard to ride accurately. They're quite challenging. And for the horse, you're asking the horse to go from a left to a right bend, change their balance, bring their balance back to you. So that's a really good exercise as well. And if you have a horse that is stiff to one particular direction, you don't have to complete the Serpentine. You can do more loops left than right and work on one side and work on strengthening. So again, I'm not a trainer, but I really like those with the young horses because that change of direction through the Serpentine is actually really challenging.
Perfect, thank you.
No problem. Erin, would I still wear boots then for an hour-long dressage or jump lesson if they aren't needed? Well, that's a great question. And so for me, for my horse, if I'm doing flat work, he goes bare-legged, but he doesn't interfere with himself. And he also doesn't happen to wear shoes because he doesn't need to. And so it really depends on what you're doing. So again, it's an individual question. If I'm riding him on the flat, he doesn't need boots, so he doesn't wear them. But if you have a horse that maybe has shoes on and is going to interfere with himself, then absolutely you're going to protect those legs, but you're going to pay attention and you're going to take them off right away. Like most of us, when we leave the arena, we'll pick our horse's feet out. I would suggest, rip the boots off while you're picking the feet out. No big deal. Tabitha says, what are the best ways to increase galloping sets? I remember talking about galloping so long and walk for so long or waiting the 10 minutes for the heart rate to come down. So yeah, it's all going to be based on that heart rate. And so you're going to do usually 10 and 1 is the like traditional. So you do I actually start mine 30 seconds, so I do a 30-second burst, and my first set, I do a 30-second burst, and then I monitor those vitals right away. And if I'm comfortable that we're returning to a resting rate very, very quickly, I might do a couple of those 30-second bursts. You don't necessarily need to wait the full 10 minutes if your horse has recovered. But if your horse hasn't recovered to a baseline within that 10 minutes, you're too soon and you need to go back and do some groundwork. And so a lot of people work on the 10 and 1. So 1 minute of your fast work and then a 10-minute walking, and watch your parameters. But it's all going to come down to those parameters and your recovery times. Emerson asks, when talking about the Icing Legs, should we do front and back or just front, the whole leg from the knee? Okay, so generally speaking, for most horses, the tendons on the front take the most impact. And so we're typically just looking at the front, and generally speaking, just from the knee down. Because again, you can certainly get superficial digital flexor injuries, and I've seen them above the carpus, but generally speaking, just the knee down is kind of the risk spot, if you like. So front legs, knees down. The back tendons typically don't take the same strain and heat up as much, although again, it depends on what you're doing. And if you're concerned, there's no rule that says you just have to do the front. You can absolutely do the back as well. It's not going to do any harm. But for me, it's that the impact and the flexion of the front legs. Let's see. Natalie says, I once did a whole event pre-training bootless since my horse, it worked out just fine. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not anti-boot, don't get me wrong, my horse runs in boots, but I think it's just really important that we understand why we're using the boot. And so the boot is really to protect our horses from impact. And that's it. There's a lot of misconception out there that boots can quote unquote support tendons. You're not holding 1,200 pounds up with a piece of neoprene. It just doesn't work. And so what we're doing is protecting them from impact, but we need to understand that that's stopping the heat dissipation. And so we want to get the boots are there for a reason. My horse runs in boots and he just runs entry level, but they're taken off right at the finish line.
Perfect. Awesome. So we'll just give everybody another minute or two in case there's any last minute questions that pop up. But this has been so awesome, Sarah. Thank you so much for doing this for us. This has been like a whole bunch of, like awesome, great information, and it has sparked lots of good questions and discussion about it.
I think just while people are thinking, I think the main thing that I come back to and my philosophy is, why do you do what you do? Right. And so for me, I do what I do for fun, but I want to keep my horse, safe. But, you know, why do I put boots on? Is it because I want the pretty colors, or is it because I want to protect my horse's leg? Right. Why do I put a certain piece of tack, a certain piece of equipment on? So I think as long as you're consistently questioning the why, then you're gonna be okay.
I think that's such a good point. Like, I know when I was much younger, I was like, you know, bridles with the flash look really cool at that time. I don't use one now, but it's just knowing what you're using it for, right? Like, I like to use this because it's a certain look or color, or I use this for a certain function. And it's just, yeah, like educating yourself, understanding, and then like, I don't know, like someone once said, like, do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. And that's right. That's all we can ask in the big world.
That's right. Am I being voluntold into a nutrition session? I'm seeing this pop up on the chat.
Well, maybe we could talk about that. I think as we wrap up, is there any last like thoughts or tips or anything you'd give us eventing people, like just from your experience, like on fitness? I guess one huge thing, it's just so individual, like get to know your horse, get to know their baselines, TPR, what's normal for them. Like, is there anything else that you can think of?
So safety, I mean, safety is broadly safety. Just consider the safety of your horse and the safety of yourself. And so if you're not feeling fit or confident, and remember, mental fitness is a big part of it as well. And I know that's a whole other topic, but absolutely, you know, why are you doing this? And it should be fun for all of us, but get to know your individual horse. And like I say, practice taking their pulse, practice taking their respiration rate. It sounds really silly, but it can be quite challenging, especially if you're a little bit stressed and, you know, you've got some stuff going on. So for me, it's just get to know your horse, what's normal for your horse. And that way, if something is abnormal, you can flag it before it's a problem. So if you're used to ripping your boots off right away, and you know, the one day you rip your boots off and there's something weird with your horse's leg, you're on it, right? You're icing it, you're on it. Whereas, you know, maybe you walk around for 10 minutes and then you chat with your friend, and then you're gonna, you know, like if you're not paying attention. So for me, it's just know what's normal. And there's a very important saying in veterinary medicine. We say you miss more for not looking than not knowing. And that's how I approach my riding and my horses as well. I might not know what the problem is, but if it's not normal, I know that it's a problem.
You just made me think of one more question.
That's fine.
And I know lots of people poultice at events and at other horse disciplines. Do you have any preference or opinion on whether to poultice immediately after they run? Like you'll ice, you'll do the things, and maybe like poultice an hour after and leave it overnight? Or are you more in the camp of you'd rather like ice, wait, see if anything pops up, and then poultice to see if it has gotten worse or gone away?
So good question. Let's just take
Sorry.
the lid off the can of worms everywhere. For me, I'm not a fan of slapping it on right away. Okay, because we really want to make sure that that heat has dissipated through that tendon. And so we've iced, if we're talking about a horse that's run a prelim event, we've iced our horse for 30 minutes. I want them to walk for, and then we're going to hand walk, right? We're going to make sure they're doing okay. We need to remember why we poultice. Okay, so poulticing does actually, it has to heat up the leg, right? It's a leg play, and we usually poultice and wrap. Okay, why are we doing that? So for me, I have no problem with it happening. And there is, there's lots of benefits to keeping the legs warmer, because we certainly don't want to shock them. But for me, I don't like doing it immediately after icing, because I want to make sure that that leg has had the time to dissipate the heat and return to its state of normal. Okay. And again, why are we poulticing? Like, why, again, comes back to why are we doing that? Are we doing it because that's what we've done for years and that's what the trainer says to do? Or are we doing it because we've thought it out? And so, that's a really important thing to think of. And, some of the poultices like have astringents in them. So, the Uptight or Ice Tight or whatever have a lot of astringents in them as well. And so that can help cool the leg. It's an alcohol-based product. It can help cool the leg, take heat away. And it can also, like astringents, we know, quote unquote, tighten the skin. Maybe, and it feels good. Right? So there's no problem doing something if that's what you've always done and it's worked really well for you and your horse does well with that, great. But again, just pay attention to the timing of that and when you're doing it. So I'm on team ice, I'm on team wait, and then I'm on team poultice overnight if you'd like to.
Awesome. That's exactly where I'm coming from too. Yeah, I like to know if something's going on first and then address it, not just cover it up and not know sort of thing.
Yeah. Wrap and pray.
Yeah.
I'm not on team wrap and pray.
No, that's awesome.
And there was a quick question
yes,
that just popped up about, do I put any type of absorbing products on the muscles for hard workouts? So again, why are you doing it? Right? For me, I think if you've cooled your horse out appropriately, like we talked about the importance of cool down, if you've cooled your horse out and you want to do that, because again, it feels good, right? I like muscle rubs when my muscles are sore. There's nothing wrong with doing it, but just why are you doing that? And if it's to help your horse feel a little better and help the cooling on the skin, that's great. There's no harm in doing that. But again, it's such a minefield. There's so many products out there. I'm sure, we're all like, you probably got, 12 bottles of different magical solutions in your tack room. And I think it's just important to understand that, why are we doing it? Now, I will say, and this is a little bit, that this is a much bigger topic, but the way to cool horses is still just cold water. Anything that you spray on them, or any cooling blankets or any of this stuff, there's been all sorts of studies. Dr. David Ramey, a lot of you probably follow him on Facebook, dispels all kinds of myths about cooling products and cooling blankets, and he's a really great resource.
Water on, water off.
Right, it's just evaporation. Like it's just how it works.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, I think that is it for questions. This has been awesome. Thank you everybody for coming out. This has been a great turnout. We're so happy that everybody could come, and we're so thankful for Sarah for coming and sharing her knowledge. This has been like lots of really good questions and lots of good discussion, and we will maybe talk about doing something like this again soon.
Thank you everyone for coming. I appreciate you giving up your Friday evening to spend with me.
Awesome. All right, well, thank you everybody. Thank you, Sarah, again, and thank you from the Yay for supporting us and continuing to do so. And we hope
Hopefully
to see
we'll
everybody.
see everybody out at the summer. And if you see Max, he appreciates everyone saying hi.
Yeah, hopefully, yes, hopefully we'll see everybody in person, face to face really soon. All right.
And if you have questions and you see me at an event, unless I've literally just come off cross country and I look like I'm hypoxic, feel free to chat with me.
Awesome. All right. Thank you guys. Bye-bye.